Welcome to Searching for Ghosts on YouTube. This is the revisited series of Season 1, The Disappearance of Cayce Lynn McDaniel. This is Ep.4 The Letter. Okay, in this episode, we're going to talk about the letter and what that was. Cayce had been talking to an adult who was in jail, and Cindy found out about it and it made the newspapers. And going back to the letter was supposedly written by an adult male who said that God was telling him to take her as his virgin. So you've kind of got this theme of adult males interested in Cayce. We also get into the phone call at the church. You know, I don't let that go. Found some discrepancies on that in this episode. And it ends with a plea to Cindy to come and do an interview. She had gotten out of jail. I'd gotten word. And so I was trying to reignite that fire, you know, and get that going. The tack I took with this podcast, the tack I had to take was until I felt that Cindy was the get. If I could get her in my mind at this point, I thought all my questions would be answered, right? Until I could get there, I had to keep going, right? So I had 6 hours of interview with Dawn and Kjo. And we, like I said, we covered all the theories and all this and that. So by this time, the Jackson Sun articles had come through, and it worked out well because someone had gotten me some newspapers.com. I'd never heard of it at the time, articles. And then what I got from the Milan Mirror, and it just so happened I got a lot from the actual Jackson Sun going through manually and getting that wasn't on newspapers.com. So I had the best of both worlds at this point. So the tack with this podcast was until Cindy would come along, it was just to take, because all I had were rumors, right? So you take the rumors that keep popping up. So I had this long interview with Dawn and Kjo, you know, and the certain things would just stick out to you naturally. So, you know, you're like, oh, well, I've heard that on Topics. I saw that on Topics. This came up again. And then when I got the newspaper stuff, I started finding it mentioned there. And those were kind of the rumors that I honed in on. So it was a strategic, because all I could do was rumors, but at least I would do the ones that kept popping up and had some documentation, you know, had at least been published in the news or whatever. And that way it wasn't just chasing every crazy wild theory that was out there. A lot of people get into this with a smartest person in the room mentality. And that's probably, you know, going back to the police not wanting to deal with me, you know, they probably thought that too, you know, and that's not how that's not how I was coming at this. You know, it wasn't, well, these dumb cops can't figure it out. No, number one thing was it was fresh eyes, right? Fresh eyes, someone from not around there, no personal relationships with anybody in that town that would pop up in that investigation, right? The other thing was to look at it and sift through the rumors that kept popping up and try to connect the dots. So what my tack ended up being was, okay, I'm not worried about being right, okay? In the sense of I'm the smartest person in the room and I'm going to show all these cops because they're so dumb. No, my attack was take the rumors that kept coming up that had some sort of confirmation and start throwing that against the wall to see what would stick. I didn't mind being wrong about a theory because people love to be right, okay? And this happened all throughout this podcast where that joker doesn't know what he's talking about. That's not what happened. This would happen. Then they start talking. They can't help themselves. So it was, while I didn't want to just throw anything against the wall, I didn't want to be topics in audio. So take, through my research, the best rumors, if you will, for lack of a better term, throw those against the wall and then see what sticks. And so that's the tack I took in this podcast. I had to, but again, I'm still holding out hope at this point for Cindy to come through and just shine the light on all this stuff. Let's listen to the first clip.
In a case like this, there are a ton of theories. In August, it will be 21 years. 21 years since Cayce McDaniel vanished. In that span of time, a lot of things can happen. Potential sources pass away. Recollections from people close to the case become fuzzy. There is a game called Chinese Whispers. In the United States, it's known as the telephone game. In this game, one person whispers a message in the ear of the next person in line. The second person does the same thing to the person next to them, and so on. The last player announces the message to the entire group. The objective is for the first person and the last person to have the same message. But errors happen in the retelling, and depending on how many people are playing the game, many times the last message in no way resembles the original one. While this makes for wonderful child's play, it can cause high blood pressure and hair loss when it comes to investigating a 21-year-old missing persons case. I'm Brandon Barnett, and this is Searching for Ghosts.
Okay, so the Chinese Whispers thing, right? This is crazy. This happened this past weekend. Spoiler alert for any of you who haven't listened to the podcast or don't know the story. There has been an arrest made in this case since the podcast came out. And so I'm not actively investigating it. It's in the hands of law enforcement. And but throughout the course of this podcast, I would get tips, because going back to the mistrust of law enforcement in Milan, Gibson County, people would tell me things that they wouldn't tell the police, right? So, and I would pass that stuff on, again, I don't want to give the impression that there was so much animosity there that I was like, man, I'm going to sit on this. No, we're after the same thing. I think, I believe that we are after the same thing, and I can do things that they can't do, right? I can publish, I can go public with stuff that, that they have to be very deliberate about what they talk about in the media, and obviously they can do things that I can't do. It's a law enforcement agency, right? So I would pass tips along. So I always keep my ear open, and if that way anybody wants to give me anything, I'll pass it on. But as far as like me digging into stuff on this case, I am not. So I get contacted by a source who wants to meet with me, doesn't want to do it over the phone. And we met over the weekend, and we talked, and just to show you the Chinese Whispers, the rumor thing, this was a rumor that I absolutely knew the truth to, because this was concerning me. And it was so weird to hear this as a rumor and the story behind it, which is just typical of this case, really. But anyway, I was told that did you know that Investigation Discovery was going to come down here and do a thing on Cayce, and they were supposed to come the next day, and they canceled or they didn't show up that day, and the following day Pete Hill gets arrested. Okay. So that's a rumor flying around, that it was some implied conspiracy about Investigation Discovery, or maybe it wasn't a conspiracy rumor. Maybe it was just, weird timing. The truth of the matter is, I was the one in talks with Investigation Discovery. Sarah Schuberth in Nashville, the lawyer, she started that ball rolling, and then they picked it up with me. And I mean, I had to do like screen tests, and but it was in the very beginning stages, and what they would do is they would take pitches, and I was just one of the pitches. Cayce McDaniel's case was one of the pitches, and they sit around this round table, and then they throw up, okay, what do we want the next show to be about? And they turned it down because it had too much sex and violence in it. And when I told the source this, they were like, "That's all that channel does." And I was like, "Yeah, that was my response too." But I mean, there was nothing nefarious about. They just didn't pick it up because they didn't think it was. They thought it was a little too rough for their audience, and that's what they do. They do demographic studies and all that stuff. So I'm sure they know their audience better than I, But that's what it was. But it came back to me as this kind of conspiracy rumor. And I'm pretty sure that all happened way before. I think Pete was still in prison, on another charge when I was doing the whole investigation discovery. So yeah, one has nothing to do with the other at all. And I know this for a fact because I'm the person. And, but that's a new rumor that's floating around that I guess I helped start. You're welcome.
In episode 2, Valerie, I talked about a rumor that Cayce had used a phone at the church to make a call. I asked former lead investigator Jerry Hartsfield if he remembered investigating a phone call made from the church by Cayce. He had no knowledge of any phone call being made.
I don't remember anything about it. Of course, I talked to the lady that brought her home that worked at the church, or was a church member with that group that brought Cayce home that night. We interviewed her. She didn't say anything about a phone call that I remember.
Right. There's also nothing in the news reports I've recently obtained about any phone call being made from the church. Is this just an urban legend or an oversight by police? Because without there being a working phone at Cindy's house, any call made by Cayce would be a game changer as to her whereabouts after she left the church. I had a source ask a member of the church who was there in 1996 about the phone situation from back then. The church member indicated that it would have been a church phone and not a pay phone that Cayce would have used. Then I received word from a source that there was a letter written to Cayce some months before she went missing. So I set up an interview to see what this was all about. This source stated that Cindy had possession of this letter at the time and that she let my source read it. It was from an adult authority figure who stated that God was telling him that Cayce was to be his virgin. That was the only detail given to me, but my source said it was, quote, creepy, unquote. I was also told that Cindy's boyfriend Steve, and Joe, her brother, took matters into their own hands concerning the letter. This was also confirmed in the interview I did with Kathy.
See, I wasn't around that much, but I was around long enough to know about the letter, and I was around long enough to know that Cindy and Steve and Joe went over there and jerked Cayce out of his house, and they were smoking pot. And Cindy didn't live in her house that she was in when Cayce come up. Listen, she was living in some apartments up in town, and she had told me how they went over there and drug Cayce out of this dude's house. I know it tore Cindy and Steve and Joe all up.
There is nothing in news reports to substantiate this, so I again contacted former lead investigator Jerry Hartsfield to see if law enforcement knew about the letter at the time.
I don't remember anything like that being brought up. Everything, of course, I tried to cover every single detail, followed up every lead.
Right.
For an entire year. They took me off everything. I worked this case for an entire year. Nothing but this case.
Right.
And because I had a good boss,
yeah,
Richard McCoy, and he took me off and told me that whatever it took, do it. I don't know anything about this door being kicked in and all that, because if it happened, they should have brought that to my attention.
Yeah.
And so it could have been investigated and dealt with properly.
There seemed to be a pattern of adult men showing interest in the underage Cayce. This is unsettling at best. This type of thing sets up a scenario that could easily lead to a motive to do harm to Cayce. Do these things have anything to do with Cayce's disappearance? Is the letter real? Was this the doing of a delusional older man who felt that God was speaking to him in this manner? There is one person who can either confirm or deny the existence of this letter. One person who might even still possess it and knows who the author is. That person is Cindy McDaniel, Cayce's mother. An update on Cindy. I've heard from family members that she has been released from jail. I've sent word that I still want to speak with her. There are so many questions that only she can answer, and she can remove the cloud of suspicion hanging over her by coming on this podcast. Cindy, when you're ready to talk, I'll be here, waiting. This case is the Chinese Whispers game on steroids. After 21 years, the stories didn't just morph, they attained urban legend status. And these stories are the ones that always include the disclaimer of, "I know what happened," from the people who tell them. The stories that are repeated most seem to have the least amount of hard evidence behind them. Obviously, they can't be ignored. They might be true, or at least have a kernel of truth in them. Then you have the one-off stories, the ones where a name comes up that you've never heard before, and you never hear again. Once again, you don't want to ignore this information, but these stories hardly ever lead anywhere. So you file them away in your notes and move on. Then you have the stories that are not as prevalent, but you have two or more sources who give similar accounts with similar details. And sometimes these correlate with news reports. Those are the ones that interest me the most. The idea is to walk this thing slowly and look at the reports carefully and objectively. Obviously, something was missed in this case, and I see no point in blazing through everything and making the same mistakes some 2 decades later. I noticed something in the first article of the Mirror Exchange concerning Cayce's disappearance. At the end of the article, the author gives some family history with a seemingly out-of-place piece of information concerning a friend of Cayce. Quote, Cayce's parents are divorced. Her father, Ronnie McDaniel, is living near South Fulton. He'd recently been injured in a motorcycle accident. Cayce reportedly had been friends with a Milan teenager who is now held on federal charges in a McNairy County jail. She also has an uncle living in Florida and an aunt in Knoxville. Unquote. That passage struck me as odd when I first read it. That kind of information would either take a little digging or it came from a tip. It's in the article for a reason. I later received a tip from a reporter who remembered an in-depth Jackson Sun article that revealed that Cayce was pen pals with someone in prison. Then, the day after releasing the bonus episode, I received those back articles of Cayce's disappearance from the Jackson Sun newspaper, and there is some gold in there. From the September 15th, 1996 edition of the Jackson Sun, quote, Once, a year ago, Cindy heard Cayce talking on the phone to a young man named Charlie she'd met at church. I said something about him to a friend and she was horrified. Cindy, she said, he's 18, and I jumped Cayce about it. She told me I just didn't know him. And I said, I don't care if he's the Pope. He's too old for you, and you're not to call him. She thought she was going to turn his life around. He was the first one I checked on, but he's in the McNairy County jail. Unquote. And this information verified what Kathy had said a few weeks prior.
Yeah, and he was supposed to have gotten out about the time made her mad. That's when she had moved to the house where Cayce come up missing.
Okay, I think it was the first, August and everything after the first episode, I talked about the whole milk and cookie story versus, kind of being tunnel vision on that. And not really saying this isn't true, but what if it's not? What are other avenues, right, to look at? And again, I said I started, looking into, and Cayce was seeing dudes, had boyfriends, dating guys, talking to guys, whatever. And so this Jackson Sun, and Cindy's the one who brought it up in the Jackson Sun article about this Charlie guy. And we ran that down, and he was in jail, you know, when that happened. Well, I got some conflicting reports, like, you know, again, it kind of like everything else. It was like, oh, he got out the day before, you know, but we pretty much pinned it down. This dude never shows up again, really, in any kind of investigation. His name pops up that one time kind of thing, you know. It was kind of a nothing burger when it comes down to it. But and I think this happens in a later episode, but you know, I kind of got heat for, and the implication was, and this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but the implication was, you know, if basically they weren't saying it in this terms, because this is how I heard it. This is how dumb this sounds, but it was basically saying, if you don't stick to the milk and cookie story and that this was just some random stranger kind of thing, then you're saying, if you say anything else, if you mention wild boyfriends that Cayce might have had, or maybe she was, you know, out, not at home when her, you know, unsupervised and blah, 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 you're saying she asked for this, you know, and I'll get into this probably in a later episode, deeper, but you know, my response is always, well, if that's where your mind goes immediately, that's on you. That's not even what I'm thinking. That's not what I'm saying. It's the dumbest thing to ever think anyway, and to say, but I'm the type of person, if that's what I believed, I would say it. You don't have to like parse my words and wonder if I'm speaking in code. You know, hell no, I'm not saying Cayce deserved it or was asking for it, but good grief, people. Obviously the stranger danger thing going to the house hasn't yielded any results, right? You know, and that's so vague that it could be anybody. And not saying that it couldn't have happened, some transient just blowing through town and doing it, but you know, odds are, you know, you at least have to look at the other options, right? So here's kind of proof positive that, according to the Jackson Sun article, even Cindy was concerned. I don't care if he's the Pope, you know, he's 18 years old. She was 14, 13 maybe at that time, because I think they said it was last year. So the year before she went missing. So she was 13. Okay. So yeah, man, that's something to look at. I can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? It doesn't have to be stranger danger at the house while she's sitting there with her milk and cookies. It can be a dangerous guy she was talking to. That doesn't mean that she deserved it or asked for it or caused it to happen. People whose minds automatically go there, they worry me, because it's like, how do you get there? How do you get from A to Z like that? Like, that's not even what I'm saying. Like, and again, that was kind of like, well, man, if this is the mindset, no wonder. So I will say this, and this probably cause heat, but, and I don't want to cover the blanket. I don't want to blanket cover the town, but you know, kind of going back to the pride thing about the town, Milan's real big on image. Okay. They are, just from what I've seen, you know, this is anecdotal. It's not scientific, but they're really big on image. Right. And everything's in a nice little bow and this and that. And if Cayce's got an adult man boyfriend, well, no, can't even consider that, because, you know, that's not, you know, that makes her look bad. Well, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. She was a teenager, you know, let's admit that. And it's still, she is not responsible for anything that happened to her. Right? Nobody deserves that. Right? Anyway, so that popped up finally in Jackson Sun article that I finally got. Right? So I had that. And then we have the letter. Okay? And my source saw the letter. Cindy showed it to him. So I knew Cindy knew about the letter. And it was it was just from what I was told, that was the creepiest, right? It was, again, this was another adult male, and it was, God's telling me to take you as my virgin, all this stuff. Well, okay, that's spooky, man, right? And since my source said that Cindy's the one who showed it to them, it's like, okay, well, now I've got to talk to Cindy. Like, you got to get out of jail, and we got to set a new date, and talk. Because all this stuff, all these things that I'm slowly finding out, I could hear it from the source. Now, granted, the source with the letter, that's pretty good. That's like, I mean, that's a firsthand account of seeing the letter. You get corroboration from Cindy, get her thoughts on it. Well, what do you think? What do you think this means? Do you think this had anything to do to it? That to me, I thought this was going to be the thing that smoked Cindy out, because this was the kind of stuff I was trying to get from her. At this point, you see me going down other avenues other than Cindy. So this thing's going to be a gotcha thing on Cindy. Well, no, I may ask you some hard questions, but, I've got other questions. I want to know about this letter. I want to know about this dude that she was talking to that was in jail. I've got all kinds of questions. How long you got? I got all kinds of questions, So that's why it was so important for me at this point, even more important to talk to Cindy. Okay, so you've got the phone call as well. And you can kind of see what I'm trying to do in these episodes, given that I didn't have a whole lot to go on. But, so you put the stuff out about the phone call, and then people start buzzing about that, and people start sending you information, especially if you're wrong, right? Because people love to be right. So, and that's awesome, man. My ego's not involved in this as far as like, this is my theory and I'm smarter than everybody. No, this is like, okay, let's throw the stuff out here. Let's throw the stuff out here and see what comes back. We're fishing, man. Right. And again, you're trying to do it in the most responsible way you can with rumors that have had some sort of corroboration, right? So you're not just picking the most topics-esque, gruesome thing to talk about. And then, so you've got people investigating for you, because they want to solve this case too, and they want to be a part of this, and I need them to be a part. I need people to come forward. So this is a way to, where it's not getting on the microphone. They don't even have to go on record, but if they find something out, they can send it to me almost anonymously, and then I'll start looking into it. So that was the thing. You kind of had feeders out there, right? Or feelers, where it was just like, okay, they're looking into the phone, and some boyfriends or whatever, right? And you can see how this could connect if there was a phone call made from the church to someone. We know it was not Cindy at the house, okay? I mean, I think I've even heard, I'm trying to remember all the possible things that were said to me that, Cayce called Cindy at a bar and asked permission to go somewhere. Seems like somebody even came forward and said they called them. I can't remember. When I get into this later, if I did find out during the course of the podcast, obviously I'll talk about it. It's hard for me to remember that. That's another reason why I can't be too harsh on people who can't remember things after 20 years. This podcast is 5 years old, and there's so much that I don't remember until I'm reminded of it. But, if you can find some kind of, this name of this boy keeps popping up, and he was seeing Cayce, or man, in some cases. And then, well, if you were to get some information saying that that's who she called that night, right? You're connecting dots. So that the phone call to me was paramount. Always. If that were true, that was a true story, finding that out is imperative, because that that puts distance between the, church bus dropped her off or the chaperone dropped her off on the front porch. Boom, that's it. Last week we've seen of her. Now, if there was a phone call that said, come pick me up, or, that's it, man. That's everything. Right. And so if any of these males that are popping up and, that gave Cindy pause, right. If you can put together that she called them, then there you go, man. There's your thing. And then, my work might be done. The cops can go that way, and not saying that they haven't already. I'm sure they've, if Cindy's talking that stuff back then about the boyfriend, stuff like that, the police looked into all that too. But I think we did find out that they never knew about that phone call from the church. Right. So that was a big thing. So yeah, that was kind of where we were headed with all that, trying to tie the letter in or the boyfriend in, to that possible phone call, and again, kind of throwing things out there and getting people fired up, and everybody's got their own kind of segment of this podcast that they're fired up about. I was hoping the letter would fire Cindy up, right? I was hoping the phone call would fire whomever up, right? Like just, so you kind of got this thing working for you. At least that's the idea. But guys, I hope you enjoyed this, and, subscribe. If you're just watching, please subscribe, get other people to subscribe. I'm trying to grow this thing so I can keep doing it. And, I'll see you on the flip side for episode 5.